All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're looking at the USA Patriot Act, and we're going to see how a heavily reactive piece of legislation evolved over 25 years into what is essentially the permanent architecture of modern American surveillance. It's a genuinely fascinating story of a nation in shock making a very specific choice, trading a measure of privacy for the promise of security. And what we want to understand today is how that trade fundamentally and permanently altered the relationship between us, the citizens, and the state, right up to the year 2026.
Now, to really get where we are today, we got to rewind to the beginning. Think back to the smoldering, fearful atmosphere of October 2001. The ruins of the Twin Towers were dominating the news 24/7, and the whole country was gripped by these terrifying anthrax scares. Fear was absolutely the primary political driver here. And in that chaotic environment, this staggering 342-page bill moved through Congress with incredible speed. I mean, there was almost zero debate. It passed the Senate with a shocking 98-1 vote. It was a true legislative flash. A massive historic response passed in literally just days.
So here is our timeline for today. We'll trace how that single legislative flash in 2001 snowballed into something unbelievably massive by 2026. We'll hit the Snowden leaks in 2013, the big pivot with the USA Freedom Act in 2015, that quiet expiration in 2020, and finally, the reality of the Shadow Act we live with today.
Part 1. Breaking the wall between the FBI and the CIA. The original, stated goal of the Patriot Act was actually pretty straightforward. Tear down the bureaucratic wall between domestic law enforcement, like the FBI, and foreign intelligence gathering, like the CIA, to prevent another 9/11.
But to actually tear down that wall, the act granted the government some seriously sweeping new powers. And this is crucial. A lot of these powers were previously reserved only for catching foreign spies, not for monitoring everyday Americans. So we're going to break down the three main tools that were completely reimagined for domestic use.
First up is Section 206, roving wiretaps. Before this, a warrant was basically tied to a specific piece of hardware, like a single landline phone. But under the Patriot Act, the warrant was allowed to follow the person. So if a suspect swapped to a new burner phone, it didn't matter. The surveillance just followed them automatically. No new warrant needed.
Then there's Section 213. You'll usually hear this called sneak and peek warrants. Traditionally, if the cops search your house, they have to knock, show you a warrant, and let you know what's happening. Well, this provision completely changed the game. It meant authorities could literally enter your property, gather intelligence, leave, and not tell you. They could keep you in the dark for weeks or sometimes even months later. Wild, right?
And that brings us to Section 215, the business records provision. This one is definitely the most infamous. The language written here was just incredibly broad. It allowed the government to demand any tangible thing as long as it was relevant to a terrorism investigation. At first, folks were mostly worried about the FBI demanding library checkout records or maybe medical files. But the government ended up secretly expanding their definition of any tangible thing to mean something way, way bigger.
Part 2. The whistleblower. Enter Edward Snowden in 2013. For over a decade, the true scope of how Section 215 was being used was a closely guarded secret until Snowden leaked classified documents proving the government was using it to collect bulk phone metadata of nearly every innocent American. The fallout from this was just absolutely explosive. It created this massive, very public debate. On one side, the government rigorously defended the program. They argued, hey, we're not reading your emails or listening to your calls. We are simply mapping connections to find terrorists. But on the other side, civil liberties critics were sounding the alarm. They argued this was historically unprecedented, calling it the largest warrantless surveillance program in history, sweeping up innocent citizens' data without any probable cause.
So in response to that massive public outcry, Congress actually attempted to rein things in. In 2015, they passed the USA Freedom Act. Before 2015, the NSA was directly collecting and holding all this bulk metadata themselves. Post-2015, the law forced a shift. The telecom companies would hold the data instead, and the NSA had to go get a specific, targeted warrant to request it.
This whole legal tug-of-war kept going until a really bizarre moment in history. Think back to March 2020. Right in the middle of an exploding global pandemic, Congress failed to reach a deal on reauthorization. Because of that gridlock, three key parts of the Patriot Act, including that heavily debated Section 215, technically expired. For a hot second, it almost seemed like the era had ended.
Which brings us to Part 3, the 2026 perspective. We can call this the Shadow Patriot Act because Spoiler alert, the expiration of Section 215 didn't end the surveillance at all. It just shifted the methods into the shadows. The powers evolved.
So, here is the absolute game changer, the data broker loophole. Why go through a messy legal fight to demand records when you can just buy them? By 2026, intelligence agencies don't even really need Section 215 because they can totally legally and very simply purchase your highly sensitive geolocation and personal data directly from private data broker companies. It achieves the exact same results. Honestly, it's probably far more invasive, and it completely bypasses those old warrant requirements.
And as we move through 2026, the big legal debate has fully shifted away from the Patriot Act entirely and onto FISA Section 702. Now, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act is technically intended strictly for targeting foreigners who are overseas, but in our super interconnected digital world, this program frequently just sweeps up American communications as collateral damage. And that has sparked intense, ongoing battles in Congress over whether the government should explicitly need a warrant before they can search those massive databases for American names.
But honestly, the biggest change might not even be in the law at all. It's the cultural shift. In 2026, the surveillance state is just normal. It's a deeply embedded part of American life. Between Ring doorbells capturing practically every street and facial recognition scanning us at the airport, the core spirit of the Patriot Act, prioritizing security and visibility over privacy, has moved out of the law books and straight into our daily technology. We basically built a surveillance network ourselves.
And I think that really hits on our ultimate takeaway for this explainer. The Patriot Act was born in a moment of crises, but it grew into a permanent architecture of American power. History constantly shows us that once a government gains a massive new sweeping power, they pretty much never give it back. They just evolve it, adapt it to the latest tech, and weave it into a permanent system.
So, the next time you're looking at your smartphone and you think about the staggering amount of data you're constantly generating, you have to ask yourself a big question. Do these rapidly evolving powers actually make our nation safer from 21st century threats? Or did they just make us infinitely more visible to a government that literally never forgets a tangible thing? Definitely something to chew on the next time you blindly click accept on a terms of service agreement. Thanks so much for learning with us today, and keep asking those big questions.